So if you guys have been following the solicitations for Marvel Comics, the Ultimate Wolverine comic is building up to a civil war. And this is seemingly where it starts, because what this does is this picks up after Wolverine, right? The Winter Soldier has been liberated, which is to say, basically the brainwashing is undone and he's no longer operating as this agent of basically Eurasia, right? So Colossus and Omega Red and Magik, these villains that are looking to just take out any threat that they deem necessary. And he's basically become the Wolverine that we all know and love, the kind of superhero to a degree. But he has this really interesting monologue here where he says, I once served with a fella from some island named Genosha. He told me about the history of that place, told me about a 1,000-year-old ritual, not performed anymore, but it was once the law of the land. To become an adult, the people of Genosha would undergo an exorcism. They purged themselves of the past and emerged renewed. If they didn't, they were doomed to a kind of limbo. They were considered unclean, fodder for demons. They stripped down and covered themselves in chalk, a symbol of purification, that a priest would feed them fungus that'd make them hallucinate. They'd set them out in the wild, and then they would face themselves. And so in a lot of ways, this is just kind of Wolverine coming to terms with the fact that he's not the person he used to be, that now his mind, quote unquote, has been cleaned, and he can basically start setting himself on the path of revenge against those individuals that were using him in the first place, which is kind of the age-old story of Wolverine. But the cool thing about this is that his statement and his belief system here is that those who ran what was basically Weapons Plus in the Ultimate Universe are all going to die. But he doesn't know how far-reaching it goes. Here's where the Civil War aspect starts to come into play. Because following this, Wolverine and what's called the Opposition, basically a handful of mutants that are looking to liberate other mutants that are under the control of Colossus and Illyana and those guys, that they're heading to this place called Snake Island. Now, the Opposition at this point has some very familiar faces. For example, you've got Gambit, you've got Black Widow, Abigail Brand, you've got Kitty Pryde, so that's kind of cool to see. But what they end up saying here is that their job is to get to this place and to free mutants. Now, they're operating on information that they've basically intercepted, so there's no way to know how accurate this information is. The cool thing about this is, of course, we get to see Gambit's powers on full display, and he's absolutely giving like Age of Apocalypse vibes here, right? Days of Future Past. Gambit who's war-torn, different things like that. Like, it is kind of dope to see him. He takes down the fence using his ability to charge kinetic energy, and then takes out the mines throughout the area, doing the exact same thing. What's also kind of cool about this is that it seems like there's some measure of a romantic connection between himself and Kitty Pryde. It's not overly huge. There's not a boatload of stuff that goes on. It's obviously not the same kind of romantic interest that he has with Rogue, but still, right, once this is done, Abigail Brand leads the charge, and they all go up to this facility. But that's where things get weird, because at that point, Wolverine's just like, something's wrong here. And the question's kind of asked, okay, like, what are we talking about? And he's like, where are the guards? And that's where Black Widow kind of mentions, like, you know, I didn't really see any. He's like, me neither, right? And there's no way that they would leave a top secret prison unguarded like this. And that's where Black Widow chimes in and is like, he's right? He's 100% right. Something's wrong. Now, here is one thing to keep in mind here for those of you guys who are relatively new to the Ultimate Universe and you're kind of coming from the main Marvel Universe. The characters are not written the exact same. Some characters like Wolverine are very similar just because of their level of popularity. But those of you guys who are familiar with Black Widow, you would know she would have figured this out like that. Like right off the bat, she would have been like, something's off here. There's no guards. But again, the Ultimate Universe is designed to be more in line with the real world. And so because of that, you see characters operating the way they would here in the real world, where they do not have all the facts and all the information. Not only that, they send Kitty Pryde into the building due to her ability to phase. So whatever threat happens to be there, she could just make herself intangible and then just come back out again and then warn them. But because of the fact that it takes a little too long, Gambit chimes in, right? And he's like, I really don't like what's going on here. Like, she should have only been there for a moment or two. And of course, Abigail Brand's like, look, you know, give her a minute, right? It'll be cool. But Gambit's growing increasingly impatient. Now, here's the other cool thing about this. While Abigail Brand is a leader here in the main Marvel Universe, she's the head of SWORD, the Sentient World Observation and Response Department. Basically, SHIELD monitors Earth and SWORD monitors space. And while she still maintains that air of authority, she kind of seems a little inexperienced here, because Abigail Brand in the main Marvel universe would have immediately hopped in and just been like, we got to go in there, right? It's taking way too long. She could be a bit reckless from time to time. But then Kitty Pryde finally emerges and is in a state of shock and panic, because everybody's like, what in the world is going on? And she's like, bodies. There are bodies everywhere in there. Someone massacred everyone. Now, here's the crazy thing. Once they get the door open and they get inside, we don't really get a good look at who's in here. So we don't necessarily know how much of these guys are scientists and how many of these guys are mutants that were being held here, if mutants were even being held here at all. And the reason why is because as Wolverine starts to make his way through this place, he starts picking out what are basically these prongs. And initially, it's just kind of like, what in the world is this? Of course, Wolverine doesn't know, but he's kind of their eye in the sky, right? He's their source of information, because being on the inside and part of the Weapons Plus program, he's the only one that really actually knew what was taking place inside of these facilities. But the fact that he doesn't know indicates that whatever's here is new and hasn't been seen before. And so, of course, Wolverine just tells him, we have to go down to the end of this hallway. There's a light coming from there. Whatever we're looking for is in that place. And so effectively, he starts sneaking them through this entire facility. Now, of course, guns are ready and so on and so forth. But once they get into this room, they find even more dead bodies, and Angel is in here. Now, here's the cool thing about Archangel, Warren Worthington, right? Traditionally in Marvel Comics, when he first popped up, he was just a mutant with feathery wings, and it was kind of cool. But then you go into like the Fall of the Mutants, you go into him becoming a member of Apocalypse's Four Horsemen, becoming Archangel as opposed to Angel, and most fans of the X-Men will tell you that's when Warren Worthington was at his best, and I would say that's probably true. But it's also when he was at his deadliest, and it's giving really creepy vibes here, because all he's doing is just muttering to himself and saying the same thing over and over and over again, right? Like, I won't let you, just repeatedly saying it time and time again, which seems to indicate some measure of insanity. And even Wolverine catches in on that, right? He's like, this guy is not playing with a full deck. But the response of Kitty Pryde is, those wings, right? I remember him from the files. His name is Warren Worthington, that he scared Logan and we can help, which means we need to help. And where initially Kitty Pryde walks up to him and tries to approach him, he immediately lashes out, fires off all these wings, kills Abigail Brand, and nails Beast in the eye. It's a massacre right off the bat. No quarters given and no questions are asked. And it's like, holy cow. And he's just like, I won't, right? And it's crazy because at that point, Wolverine's just like, we have to take this guy down, right? There's no rationalizing or reasoning with this guy. Not only that, his wingspan is colossal and his wing design is insane, right? He's basically bearing 4 sets of wings as opposed to 2, meaning he is far deadlier than he would traditionally be. Not only that, much like what we saw with Archangel, his traditional wings have been replaced with razor blades. So literally firing off these just daggers, for lack of a better word, at everybody he attacks. And so it takes the full contingent of the team to run up on this guy. Even Gambit channeling his powers, right, and blasting things back at him. At the end of the day, he is momentarily subdued. But here's why the Civil War aspect is so important to all of this. Because one of the things that we learn here is that as Wolverine is making his way through, number one, Beast just seems by all standards of measurement dead. Abigail Brand is 100% dead. But Wolverine says, I know it's not him, right? It's this country. They're messing around with brains. The experiments, I'm the one who got saved, right? I came back. But how do we know that we haven't changed him so much that he can never go back? This is not a damsel in distress kid. It's a horseman of the apocalypse. It's death on metal wings. Everyone it touches dies. Claws, wings, the one thing that matters is how well does it kill. So even if we can, does he deserve saving? Does he even want to be saved? Did I? And that's an important distinction here, because there is a kind of text-based page at the end of the comic, but what it basically illustrates is that following the escape of Wolverine, that Warren Worthington became the next Winter Soldier specimen. The difference here is that because Wolverine proved to be so successful, much like in the main Marvel universe, right, where basically they started fast-tracking all these weapons programs based on the experiments of Wolverine, Weapon X, all that kind of stuff, that they're doing that here, but they're basically just mass-producing mutants that have been brainwashed and are capable of doing whatever it is that they're told to do. So literally, it's the mutant population being turned against itself, a hallmark of the Civil War. And that's what makes things so fascinating here, is because for the most part, all these guys know that mutants, superheroes, are good guys. They will basically believe in people to the best of their ability. The fact that Wolverine has been saved is an illustration of that. So that moment of hesitation could ultimately be their undoing. But as Wolverine starts making his way through this facility, he ends up hearing this kind of conversation, right? Dr. Stragatsky, this is Professor Prostovich. We have not had a new update on the Angel specimen experiments, nor have we had any updates on the Katsuni Mask or the Mimic specimens. Now, here's the thing about the Mimic specimen. It's quite possibly the deadliest of all the specimens. And the reason why is because Calvin Rankin was a mutant with the ability to copy the powers and knowledge and skills of anybody around him. And it wasn't just mutants. It was anyone around him, right? Human, humanoid, mutants, it didn't really matter. And while this range has changed over the years in Marvel, right, sometimes it's up to a mile or whatever, the fact is, if he were standing here right now, he would have the powers of every single one of these mutants that are here. Mimic is criminally underrated in Marvel Comics. It's nuts how little respect that guy gets. But the fact that he's being used here, he's being built, says almost everything, because she continues on. Leaders Rasputin and Rossovich are growing impatient, Doctor. I can only make excuses for so long until your incompetence begins to stain my credibility too. And that's where she says, Dr. Stragatsky, are you there? If you do not respond, I will be forced to send people there. And that's where Wolverine starts to pick up on the voice. He doesn't seem to fully recognize it, and he doesn't even know who this person is. But they see him, right? And they say, like, step forward so I can see you there. And she says, Doctor, if this is your idea of a game, but that's when she realizes it's Wolverine. It's the Winter Soldier. And that's the thing. Wolverine does not really remember much about what he experienced during his time under Weapons Plus. But of course, they remember everything about him. And where he lashes out and he destroys the computer, the question's asked, like, who was that? And he says, somebody who's going to be dead pretty soon. It seems he may remember. But the biggest takeaway from all of this, right? This Civil War is coming. That mutants are being turned into weapons by Colossus, his sister Magik, and Omega Red. And those weapons are being used to kill mutants. Wolverine was seemingly just the first. And while he is the most successful, there are others out there who are far more deadly, which really makes it exciting to wonder how all this is going to unfold. So you guys have been asking, Rob, where's Ultimate Cyclops? Where's Cyclops in the new Ultimate Universe? When do we get to see him? Right? Does he have the same powers? Well, guys, we finally get him. And I gotta be honest with you, this guy's fate was a fate worse than death. So what this does is this kind of all starts out with a Sentinel arriving at a Eurasian Republic Sentinel manufacturing plant. Keeping in mind, the Eurasian Republic is a stronghold ran by Colossus, his sister Magik, and basically Omega Red. That while we still don't have the full totality of the backstory, at some point in time, the Maker basically screwed everything up in the universe, right? And so somehow or another, these three ended up becoming these major players and trying to destroy the mutant population. They're the ones that turned Wolverine into the Winter Soldier. And so once this thing gets here, right, this statement's made, we have a carrier Sentinel unit arriving at Base 77. Scan indicates 4 living specimens in containment aboard, but the code is muffled. And when the question's like, why is this code muffled? This guy says, I don't know how else to describe it, right? Like, didn't this unit go missing? And so that's what these guys are kind of talking amongst themselves, where they're like, look, we're supposed to have an inspection. The director's coming here, right? The top brass basically are coming here. We really don't want to have any problems. This is not the day to have any problems. So let's just go meet this unit ourselves. We'll inspect it. We'll make sure everything's on the up and up. And then once we verify that it is, it'll quell our anxiety, essentially. And so what they end up doing is they get to Base 77, where this Sentinel's at, right? They say request access to Base 77 platform, right? They give the proper code, and they're just like, okay, so this thing's been defaced, right, by the various mutants who exist out there. What you and I might say passes for the X-Men. Now, they're not really the X-Men. They're just kind of a ragtag band of rebel mutants who exist out there that are kind of unified, trying to free other captured mutants. mutants around the Eurasian Republic, but they're effectively the resistance forces. The problem is that in the midst of all of this, the weapon systems for the Sentinel start activating. And that's when they're like, go into lockdown, right? We're under attack. So at that point, you jump to the day before. And there's actually gonna be a fun little bit of trivia here. I'm curious if any of you guys pick up on it. But one of the things that happens is you initially pick up with Mikhail Rasputin. Now that's one of the ironies of this new Ultimate Universe. Historically in Marvel Comics, Colossus and Magik are the good guys. Omega Red's kind of always been a villain, essentially. And then Mikhail Rasputin is the bad guy, whereas he's the good guy here. And that's when you kind of find out what's going on, right? He's directly addressing Forge, and he says, I need to know, will it be ready for tomorrow's mission, right? The response of Forge, of course, like it will absolutely be ready. And he's like, in the upload, and he says, almost there, right? 6 more hours, give or take. And of course, Mikhail's like, look, I need something a little more firm than give or take. But the response of Forge, I'm telling you, it'll be ready. Now, here's the funny thing. Mikhail says it had better be ready Daniel. He refers to Forge by his name. Here's the trivia question that I have for you guys. What issue of Uncanny X-Men, written by Chris Claremont, was Daniel's name supposed to be revealed? It never was. But when was it supposed to be revealed? And you can't look it up on the internet. Honor system, guys. So, the thing about this is that Forge is like, yeah, I mean, it will be ready, man. It'll be ready. And so, of course, that's where Mikhail's like, our Forge team has been working tirelessly to crack, reprogram, and modify a CS unit, or Carrier Sentinel unit, one of the vast fleet of Sentinels the Eurasian Republic has at their disposal. We've likely all come up against one, right? They're advanced technological killing machines specifically targeting mutant kind. But this one has something they do not, a ghost in the machine. This is not just a commandeered Sentinel, it is a member of your team. And he says the One has graciously suggested that we upload his consciousness into the unit. He will look like one of them, but he will be one of us. Now, for those of you guys who need a bit of a reminder, right, the One is basically David, Legion, as we know him in Marvel Comics, except instead of him being a wildly powerful mutant with thousands of personalities and each personality having a power of its own, he's basically a computer system. Now, he was at one point a living being, right? That was in Ultimate Wolverine issue number 6, that he was a kid, he was basically caught in a landslide, and he was essentially believed to be dead. The idea is that it was the action of the Maker who had basically killed him, or at least attempted to kill him, to ensure David would never become that uber-powerful mutant that could potentially rewrite the entirety of reality that the Maker had worked on. But David's powers manifested, and so essentially he just rewrote his consciousness into computer code where he had been there ever since. He was the one that was instrumental in essentially undoing the brainwashing of Wolverine as the Winter Soldier and turning him back into his normal self. But him being uploaded into a Sentinel now presents 2 ideas. The first one is that seemingly he can now be destroyed. If that Sentinel's destroyed and there's no backup for the One, there's no one to really guide the team anymore, which would make it much easier for them to be destroyed. The other part of this, and most likely the scenario here, is that it now gives Marvel the ability to turn David Haller into someone who can actually go out there and do things, an active member of the team. But all this is very different from what we're used to. The traditional methods of storytelling for the X-Men, those trends are being bucked, so we don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to unfold. But the important thing is this, with this whole statement being made by Mikhail, the idea of backing up the One and so on and so forth, he says, this is optimal for your next mission, right? Cripple their Sentinel production by destroying their main manufacturing facility. And the question of Kitty Pryde, is that a smart thing to do? We've seen more Sentinel attacks, sure, but running headfirst into the killing machine factory is not going to save anyone. It's suicide. But that's where you learn the other reason for why they're doing it. He says, we have received intelligence that mutants have been captured and brought to the Master Mold, the central Sentinel manufacturing and testing site. This intelligence suggests that Directorate X are finding ways to biologically meld a mutant to a Sentinel unit. They're calling these abominations XS units. We do not know how many mutants were taken or how many have been tested on, at least not yet, but we will save who we can and ensure that atrocities like these never happen again, right? Now, here's the other part of this. The secure facility is almost completely automated, operating with a skeleton crew for one reason. It's a trap. A gamma bomb lives in its heart to destroy its secrets units and any intruders lucky enough to survive entry. And that is quite brilliant because Mikhail's the one that designed it himself. And he says, we will have 5 minutes once the alarm is tripped to locate the captured mutants before the facility self-destructs. It will not fully dismantle their Sentinel program, but it will make them hurt. It's guerrilla warfare tactics, pot shots, doing what they can where they can. Now, guerrilla warfare tactics work, sometimes they don't work. Only time will tell, but that's when you jump back to the here and now, the moment when the Sentinel activates and you have Sabretooth, Mikhail, Wolverine, and Black Widow who all just come flying out of this thing and attack these guys. Now here's the irony of this whole situation. These are nowhere near the strongest mutants that exist out there or that we're even aware of as comic book fans. But that goes to show you how much of a shoestring budget they're running on as far as powerful mutants they have at their disposal. This is not like the main Marvel universe, right? They don't have a Colossus and they don't have a Nightcrawler because Nightcrawler's dead. Gambit may or may not be as powerful as we're traditionally used to. Who knows what the whole idea is with Rogue, to say nothing of the fact that there's also the Ultimate X-Men comic, where some of those characters are still being fleshed out. It's nothing like this, and it doesn't explore the X-Men universe in the same way this one does, but it still exists, right? So there are beings out there that are still immensely powerful that simply just are not here. But this is the crazy thing. At that point, you switch over to the director and Dr. Lysenko, and one of the things they realize is that it's their worst nightmare. It's launching a strike against their Sentinel production facility, right? It's their idea of building the next phase of weapons, arms, and armament against the mutant population. There is no mention of Nimrod, but it's not to say they're not working on one. Now, as soon as Wolverine sees her, he's immediately like, you, right? Like, just is incensed at this chick. But the fact is, right, the director's interest in Wolverine isn't really this interest of like a romantic connection. I mean, maybe there is some kind of, twisted version of love involved there, but all things seem to indicate it's more like a parent and a child. Because keep in mind, the director was instrumental in Wolverine being turned into the Winter Soldier. She oversaw all the brainwashing, the false memories, the training programs, right? There was just something there about him that she just never really wanted to let go of. Again, it could be some twisted variation of love, but the fact is, right, as soon as Wolverine makes his attack, right, goes against these guys, and that's when you see what happened with Ultimate Cyclops. Because as it turns out, Cyclops is one of these guys who had been merged with the Sentinel. This guy's head had been cut off, and he's just hooked up to wires in the belly of the beast. And that's him. That's what happened with Ultimate Cyclops. It's what they're doing with these various beings that exist out here. It's why you haven't seen him. This guy was snatched up a long time ago. You take that, you combine it with the fact that Jean Grey and Professor Xavier, they were snatched up, right? Their minds were basically taken out of their bodies, and they're being used in order to telepathically control and brainwash mutants who were out there. I mean, it's a very, very dark and gruesome scene for the X-Men that exist out there, for the mutant population as a whole, right? Days of Future Past has nothing on this. Right? That's really what you're looking at here. So of course, with them having the head of Cyclops, this Sentinel's able to do exactly what you'd expect. Fire off these optic blasts that allow him to momentarily overcome Wolverine. As for the other Sentinel, right, the one that's just a human body walking around, it just looks to be the body of Cyclops. Right, so the two potentially move in tandem, right? They walk as one singular unit. Now, of course, when Wolverine is sent flying off this thing, he's basically rescued by the One, right? Who literally sends out a tentacle and it kind of grabs Wolverine and it brings him back up and it allows Wolverine to survive another day. And so at that point, you jump back to the director and Dr. Lysenko, right? Now, Dr. Lysenko just kind of says, like, I never liked being here, right? I mean, we're literally in a facility sitting on top of what is probably the deadliest bomb ever created by man. Yeah, like we're literally we're standing in our own graves. Right? I have no desire to be in this place. So like, we need to get out of here as fast as we possibly can. But that's where the director is just like the Winter Soldier, right? The Winter Soldier's back here again. And Lysenko is just like, I know, right? He's the one that got away. Let him die in the explosion. There's no time to argue, right? We need to leave. And so as they're taking off, right, the doctor just says, XS units 1 and 2, come with us, protect the director, and do it at all costs. And so that's where you kind of follow Wolverine, because the reality here is that Wolverine is deviating from the mission. Their mission was to get in here, destroy the Sentinel factory, and rescue any mutants they can, if there's even any mutants to rescue at all. But as soon as Wolverine got here, he immediately went after the director. And that's where things get really interesting here. And you guys will see what I mean as we get towards the end of this. Because what ends up happening is Wolverine chasing them down ends up coming across Cyclops and basically his body again. And he goes on the attack. But this time, he's blasted away yet again. Now, what's ironic about this is that potentially he recognizes Cyclops. There's no direct indication that he does. He destroys the physical body of the Sentinel, right? Just tears this thing to shreds. But he doesn't really seem to go in for the kill with regards to the direct Sentinel himself, right? The head of Cyclops. Now, this could simply just be circumstantial, right? He just doesn't get a chance to, right? Because of the fact that Cyclops' head blasts Wolverine and sends him flying. And then as soon as the director and the doctor are on the helicopter and they take off, the Sentinel bails out as well. But I would love to believe that on some level, before all of this happened in the story that we simply have not been given yet, when Wolverine was part of the resistance force out there trying to rescue various mutants, he was ultimately kidnapped himself. He was taken into the Winter Soldier program, so basically the Ultimate Universe's version of Weapons Plus and Weapon X, that Cyclops was ideally one of the people that was trying to rescue him. And Cyclops was in turn taken, because it's not like Scott Summers is just a dude with just like, you know, some glasses on his face. It's him with what would look to be his traditional X-Men uniform, his optic visor, right? The thing over his head. Now, maybe they designed it for the use of his powers to control and contain them and fire the optic blasts off in certain ways, but it would be all the more tragic if, in an effort to rescue Wolverine, Cyclops was taken. And that may even be how it is that Jean Grey and Professor X were taken. That's the story that we just don't have. But the reality here is that it's a twisted and grisly end, because once you get back to the helicopter itself with Wolverine, that he just watches them fly away, right? So again, he still holds that grudge. He still wants to go after them. And then of course you have Mikhail, who says, we have less than a minute. Where is he, Sabretooth? Where is Wolverine? Now, the cool thing about this is it looks like they did rescue a mutant, and it looks like the mutant they rescued was Iceman. It looks like they got Bobby Drake. And if they did, they now have, as most of you guys probably know, one of the most powerful mutants in existence on their side. But again, we don't necessarily know for sure, because we don't really see his face. He looks like he's covered in ice, right? It looks like Bobby Drake, but only time will tell. But that's where Sabretooth is just like, I don't know where Wolverine is, right? He wandered off, right? And then that's when Wolverine reappears here. Now, you do get a kind of beef between the two of them, right? It doesn't really seem to be the same kind of beef that you have in the main Marvel Universe, where Wolverine has historically killed all of Wolverine's love interests on his birthday. But it is, of course, beef between the two of them, because Winter Soldier has gone after Sabretooth and the people Sabretooth cares about, other members of the X-Men community. And that's where he kind of teases him, right? He probably saw a squirrel that got him running. And that's where Wolverine is just like, yeah, bub, something like that, right? So seemingly he chased them off. But the implication here, and this is where I kind of want to read between the lines, the indication here is that not everything seems to be what it actually seems to be. That they destroy the factory, right? But where Wolverine is just kind of forced to grab them and take off, it's entirely possible that Wolverine continuing to go after the director, even knowing what his mission is this kind of subconscious programming to always want to return home. And so if that's the case, Wolverine is essentially a Trojan horse, and he just doesn't know it. And if he takes over a mission designed to lead the team against the director, he could very well just be leading them into a trap. Now, again, that's just kind of a guess, right? I'm just throwing my personal opinions out there, but let me know what you guys think, right? It is cool, but you guys finally get to see Cyclops. You get the answer to your question. Now the question becomes, how did he get that way? So, we are back with Ultimate Wolverine. And what this does is this initially picks up with Sabretooth going to visit Logan. Now, here's a cool thing about this, right? That they're not really enemies the way that we're traditionally used to. In fact, Sabretooth was part of the opposition to Colossus, his sister Magik and Omega Red. But one of the things that goes on is that, one, he knows Wolverine's not really sleeping, right? So he kind of wakes him up. But he also asks him for a favor. And this is a really, really cool moment between these guys, because he says, I came with some news, which is to say, I came to say goodbye. And he's just like, I'm leaving. And Wolverine's initially taken aback by this, right? He's like, so you're gonna like abandon us after everything that's gone on? And that's kind of the crazy thing about this, is because the opposition has been around for quite some time. While the Ultimate Universe as it stands now is a universe that was essentially created by the Maker because he screwed with time, all we really know about the Eurasian Republic is that it's ruled over by Colossus, Magik, and Omega Red. The opposition seemingly rose in response to that, and it's kind of been composed of various members of the mutant community that we've known over the years. Mikhail Rasputin leads it, but you've also got Black Widow, who's not really a mutant. You have Gambit and a few other people. But one of the things that we learned that had been going on for quite some time was that Sabretooth had been trying to rescue Wolverine after he had basically been taken by the Eurasian Republic and turned into the Winter Soldier. And so now that he's back, Wolverine's just kind of like, okay, tell me what's going on. And that's where Sabretooth says, those two kids that I was hiding in Smolensk, Artie and Leech, they're not over the border. They're still here, partly because I asked them to stay. They're like us. They don't have any family, and I've taken a liking to them, and since they don't have anybody and I don't have anybody, we just sort of became family. And so he's like, it's my job to look after them. And he says, I just know that there's no future for them in this place. If they stay, they may die. And who knows what the Eurasian Republic has planned for us. Like, I'm going to take them somewhere else, right? Someplace safe. I'm going to raise them, protect them, give them a good life away from all of this. And that's where Wolverine asks, did you tell Mikhail? Because the reality here is that when it comes to a group like the opposition, for all the good they do in trying to oppose the forces of the Eurasian Republic, they're not that dissimilar from the Eurasian Republic, which is to say, it's not a group that you just walk away from very easily. You need to have a very good reason for why. And they might even send their people after you if you simply just leave. And that's what Sabretooth is concerned about. He says, I can't, right? I know the speech that he'd give. The movement's more important than the individual, but these are good kids, Logan, and I care about them. And so that's when you get this really interesting perspective of Sabretooth, because Wolverine responds and he says, it sounds like you've already made up your mind, right? I can't say that I blame you, but this is not a good time for the opposition. We've been taking losses, and Sabretooth recognizes that. He says, look, I know, right? I totally get that, but I don't want to see these two be among the people that we've lost. I know that you think that I didn't keep my promise to you, but I tried. I went digging around, and I found this. It's called the Muramasa blade. Legend has it that it can cut keener than any other blade made by man. They say that it can cut through the soul. They also say it may be the only thing that can actually kill one of us healers. Now, here's an important thing to understand about the Muramasa blade, because the one that you see here is actually a combination of both blade variants in the main Marvel Universe. So sidestepping this comic for a second, the Muramasa blade is the only weapon in the Marvel Universe that can actually kill Wolverine permanently, which is to say, it can cut through adamantium and it shuts down Wolverine's healing factor. Now, there are ways around it, right? Say, for example, you were to stab Wolverine through the chest with the Muramasa blade, and then in turn, he were to cut around that actual stab wound and pull that chunk of skin out, it would actually start to heal normally. So it only really affects that one itty-bitty area, but of course, it would also impact the heart, and there's various other things that go with it. The original Muramasa blade, which was made by Muramasa himself, was black, and sometimes it's called the Black Blade, oftentimes it's confused with the Ebony Blade in Marvel Comics, but the long and short of the original Muramasa blade was that Muramasa himself put his own soul in the sword. And so more often than not, it just turns the person into a more capable fighter. Not only that, the sword grants some modifications in terms of durability and different things like that, but truth to tell, if you took the Muramasa blade and you put it in the hands of somebody like me, who had no idea what to do with a sword, I'd get myself killed, right? Whereas if you put it in the hands of someone who is prodigious and knows how to use a sword, yeah, they're going to tear you apart, and you're not really going to stand much of a fighting chance. Here's the caveat to the original Muramasa blade, that those individuals who wield that sword will ultimately succumb to its bloodlust. That's why it's oftentimes confused with the Ebony Blade, because they do share that concept together. The second Muramasa blade, which is the one that looks like the one that you see here, that was fashioned out of Wolverine's soul, hence the reason why it can actually kill Wolverine. But regardless of how you slice it, it's still an incredibly deadly weapon. And so when this is given to Wolverine, Sabretooth just says, right, maybe you can give it to Kitty or Mikhail, just in case. All I ask in return is that you make me a promise. And the question of Wolverine is like, okay, well, what kind of promise are we talking about? And that's where Sabretooth says, do not tell anyone about me and the kids. Give us time. Let us disappear. And that's where Wolverine simply just says, that I think I can manage. Now, up to this point, right, when you switch over to Colossus, Magik, and Omega Red, one of the things to keep in mind here is that Colossus did not know that his brother Mikhail was leading the opposition. And so he's essentially finding out for the first time that his own family is standing against him, which is kind of the inverse of how it's always been in Marvel Comics. Colossus was always the good guy on the side of the X-Men, and Mikhail was usually the bad guy on the side of whatever organization he was a part of at that point in time. The guy's very much an opportunist, if not incredibly powerful in his own right. But now it's the opposite. But that's one of the things that frustrates Colossus, because he asks, how is it that I have only just learned this? How did we not know that my brother was running the opposition? And the response is, Leader Rasputin, it took some time to piece the footage together. They disrupted the signal somehow, and we essentially had to lay eyes on. At least that seems to be what he's indicating. Now, the concern of Colossus here is actually justified, because while there's a lot of explanations on the kind of things that Mikhail can do, and people I think often draw it out and make it more complicated than it needs to be, the long and short of Mikhail Rasputin's powers is that he has the ability to manipulate subatomic energy, but more so than that, he can manipulate other people's powers. He usually uses his powers to kind of like teleport around. That's what he's historically done in Marvel. But more so than that, being able to shut down or overpower another person by taking control of their powers, that's the real concern here. That's the real issue that Colossus has, assuming that those powers are the same. Because if Colossus were to face off against his brother, Colossus would stand a pretty decent chance, just because of the fact that his abilities are not energy-based. But someone like Magik, well, at that point, it becomes a whole different beast. And so at the end of the day, Colossus feels worse off now than they did before, because not only has his own family turned against him, which is just a shot to the gut, they still don't know where the opposition is located at, and the opposition is successfully launching guerrilla warfare tactics, taking out various arms and armament components that belong to the Eurasian Republic. But that's when Dr. Prostovich walks in. Now, Dr. Prostovich, keeping in mind, she's the one that kind of runs the Weapons Plus program, and the one that turned Wolverine into the Winter Soldier. And she says, my team may have discovered something of interest. And that's where Colossus says, then interest me, Director Prostovich. And she says, we tasked 3 Sentinel units to survey the western border. They found nothing out of the ordinary until we realized it was not ordinary at all. This plot of land that I'm showing you here is the Chernobyl power plant. And of course, Colossus is like, look, I don't get the point of why you're telling me this. I mean, there's clearly nothing there. And that's where she says that's the issue. There should be something there, but it's gone missing somehow. A digital search also came back the same way. Empty land. But I took the liberty of sending a small reconnaissance team with analog equipment, and they came back with this. The plant still exists, only it's missing from all databases and files and will not appear on any digital photography or scans. Now, the initial thought of Magik is that it's a telepath, but the response of Prostovich is no, right? It kind of is, but it's kind of not. Someone who can manipulate cyberspace, but further analog reconnaissance at the area has uncovered a small group working at the plant, working primarily at night, moving pallets of aid and weapons in and out, trucks carrying individuals. Now, that's an important thing to know here, is because the opposition has Legion, and while Legion isn't necessarily the David Haller that we're familiar with, right? Thousands of personalities, each one with a power, while he did die at a very young age, and it was believed that he was basically killed by the Maker, he kept his consciousness alive and backed his consciousness up into a computer system. That's where he resides. And as a member of the opposition, he controls cyberspace. So that's why this whole plant is not showing up here. And so at that moment, Omega Red chimes in and says, Director, the plant is dead, right? The core was breached and the plant was abandoned. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. And Prostovich fires back. She says, perhaps there is a mutant who can absorb the residual radiation, or that too was a deception. However, I do believe that this is genuine. We have discovered the hidden headquarters of the opposition. And the question of Colossus is, does that mean we should drop the Cerebro bomb? Now, here's a crazy thing, and it's one of the easy things to forget when it comes to the Eurasian Republic. They have Xavier, and they have Jean Grey, or technically they have their brains, but they have the minds of the two most powerful telepaths in the world. We haven't quite figured out everything they're doing with them outside of brainwashing people or mutants into becoming super soldiers, but if they're developing a cerebro bomb, this is probably exactly what it sounds like. Something akin to what we saw in like the Logan film, right? A telepathic attack, if only incidental, so extreme that it basically kills everybody in its immediate vicinity. And that's probably what's going to be happening here. But the response of Prostovich is no, right? The bomb is not ready. Another 2 weeks at least, perhaps 3 or 4. We're making progress, but using it now would be folly. And so the question is, then what? What's your suggestion? Do we just sit around and twiddle our thumbs and wait until your bomb is ready and then hope they're there when we drop it? The response she has here is no, right? A ground assault. And that's when Omega Red chimes in and says 100%, right? The battlefield calls to me. And so at that point, you pick up with Sabretooth basically sneaking out with the kids, Wolverine watching the whole thing and just making sure that nobody catches them or anything like that. But in the midst of all of this, missiles come flying into the base, and Omega Red launches his attack against everyone here. And immediately, he goes after Wolverine. Now, here's the kicker about this, right? We don't necessarily have the nitty-gritty details of how Omega Red became Omega Red. We can largely assume that it's very much the same way as it is in the main Marvel Universe. He was basically a psychopath who ended up becoming a part of what was, in effect, Russia's version of Weapons Plus, right? Developing super soldiers using carbonadium, a cheap knockoff version of adamantium, instead of the actual adamantium itself. And you'll see what I'm talking about here, because a lot of the elements of Omega Red remain the same. The only difference here is he doesn't really know about Wolverine. They don't really have any history together. The only thing that he knows about him is that at one point he was the Winter Soldier. And he says that, right? He says, I know you. Did you forget your way home? Our little Winter Soldier. And so Wolverine looking at the sword, Omega Red realizing Wolverine's looking at the sword, Wolverine goes for it. And then a couple of Sentinels attack and basically throw him off. At that point, Omega Red snares him up in his tentacles and then just says, you've gotten sloppy in your work. Director Prostovich may be able to fix that for you. And then he says, and this, right, picking up the sword, it's like, do you want it? Right, what is it, Winter Soldier? A sword. But what does this sword do? And the response of Wolverine, it's none of your business, right? Slashes one of the tentacles of Omega Red and then literally gashes this guy through the shoulder. Now, Omega Red has a healing factor, so despite being stabbed in the shoulder and then despite being stabbed in the arm, it's not enough to kill him, but it is enough to at least injure Omega Red momentarily. And this is where I say the familiar nature of his character comes into play, in the sense that he feeds on the life force of other people through his carbonadium tentacles to keep himself alive. Notice, there is no mention of a carbonadium synthesizer, so that doesn't really seem to be a part of his lore in the Ultimate Universe. But the fact is, right, he just absorbs the life force off of a couple of guys and just says, your friends abandon you. And at that point, all the other members of the opposition show up, right? Red Guardian, Black Widow, Gambit, Blink, the whole 9 yards, Iceman, Mikhail. And here's a crazy thing about this, and this is up for interpretation, and I want to know how you guys feel about this, because what goes on here is that Mikhail says, Arcady, have you come to join us too? And Arcady says no, right? Rostovich is just like, no, you have betrayed the Republic and your family. Treason is a crime punishable by death, but you commit treason against your brother and sister, against your friend. I have come to destroy you. And the response of Mikhail is this, you are, as ever, mistaken, old friend. And that's an important statement, because we don't necessarily know what it means, but it's entirely possible he's a double agent. It's entirely possible that he's actually here as a spy, and not even Omega Red knows that that's what's going on. But the fact is, it doesn't make any difference anyway, because in that moment, Wolverine pops his claws, has the sword in his hand, and goes charging at Omega Red. And where a great big huge fight breaks out, we don't necessarily see what happens to Omega Red in the moment. Instead, what happens is you switch back over to Colossus, right? And one of his generals walk in. He says, Leader Rasputin, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have news. And of course, Colossus is like, what news do you have? And the guy says, from the Chernobyl operation, sir, only this box has returned thus far. It says it is from your brother, Mikhail. I did not look inside. And Colossus responds, bring it to me. And when he cracks it open, there's a letter attached to it that says, dearest brother and sister, I must return your gift as I found it unacceptable. And when the box is opened up, it's Omega Red's own head, right? It's a scene out of 7, right? What's in the box? They cut his head off and sent it back to Colossus with the second half of the note reading, "Do not send a Rossovich to do a Rasputin's job." That's pretty brutal, man. That's pretty hardcore. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.